I am Jennifer, a 25-year-old professional currently residing with my grandmother and commuting from her place to work. The reason behind living with my grandmother is that my mother passed away due to an illness. She fell sick when I was merely 3 years old, and her recovery seemed bleak. During that time, it appeared that my father was involved in an affair, despite my mother's illness. After my mother's demise when I turned 5, my father must have considered me a burden. Consequently, he left me with my paternal grandmother and disappeared without a trace. Since I had no siblings and both of my parents were gone, my grandparents took on the responsibility of raising me. Feeling lonely, I would inquire every day about when my father would come to pick me up. However, my grandparents would respond with a bitter smile each time. Gradually, I came to comprehend that my father had abandoned me. Nevertheless, my grandparents, who were in their 50s at that time, wholeheartedly raised me. My grandmother, who used to be a homemaker, began working part-time to ensure that I didn't go hungry. She even bought me beautiful clothes and toys. Despite being concerned about their own retirement, my grandparents supported me. When the time came for me to take the high school entrance exam, my grandmother told me that I didn't have to insist on attending a public high school. She encouraged me to go wherever I wanted, but I expressed my concern about burdening her and my grandpa. However, she reassured me by mentioning their savings and said that she would give her best to secure a place in a public high school. I was determined to pass the exam, so I asked for their support. They agreed, and I successfully gained admission to one of the top public high schools. My grandparents expressed joy for my achievements, and my grandfather even made a reservation at a restaurant to celebrate. I felt incredibly fortunate to be cherished by such compassionate grandparents. My high school life was enjoyable, but one day, I returned home to a gloomy atmosphere. Curious about the change, I inquired with my grandmother, and she revealed that my grandfather had received a diagnosis of an illness. His condition rapidly deteriorated, leading to frequent hospital visits. Since my grandfather had retired at that time, my grandmother had to support the family by juggling multiple part-time jobs. Although his medical expenses were covered by life insurance, my grandmother's exhaustion prevented her from continuing to work. In light of these circumstances, she decided to seek assistance from the government and visited the city office. Yes, she applied for public assistance, and the application process seemed quite intricate. Nevertheless, her application was somehow approved. However, despite the relief of the approval, I found myself contemplating what the future held for us. The high school I attended was focused on college preparation, and it was expected that everyone would proceed to higher education. I was taken aback when I learned at the city office that households receiving welfare benefits faced challenges in pursuing college unless they separated their households. Unfortunately, separating households would also result in a reduction of welfare benefits, presenting a difficult dilemma. Although I aspired to attend college, the prospect of going far away seemed daunting. Consequently, I made the decision to start working as soon as possible to repay my grandparents for their unwavering support. Tearfully, my grandmother said, "I deeply regret what has happened. It's all because of your father. I feel responsible for not raising him properly." I reassured her, saying, "It's not like that, Grandpa and Grandma. You both took exceptional care of me. I will work diligently, so please don't worry." Despite my efforts to console her, I couldn't shake the feelings of sadness and disappointment. My dreams of attending college seemed distant and unattainable. Eventually, at the age of 18, I secured a job. By that time, I was able to sustain myself without relying on welfare. However, my grandfather's condition. My grandfather's health was already deteriorating, and he received the news that he had only 6 months left to live. Before his passing, he left me with these words, "Jennifer, I'm sorry for all the trouble." I reassured him, "Grandpa, it's not like that. Please take care of yourself, and I love you." After my grandfather's cremation, I intensified my efforts at work. I took on a lot of overtime so that my grandmother wouldn't have to work part-time anymore. Time flew by, and I reached the age of 25. I was incredibly busy every day, leaving me with no time for a boyfriend. Besides, I hesitated to pursue love because I feared that my father's abandonment might have left emotional scars. Then, one day, I received a call informing me that my father, whom I hadn't been in touch with for a long time, had passed away in a traffic accident. Strangely, I didn't feel a shred of sadness, and my grandmother didn't show any signs of grief either. Perhaps she was secretly sad, but she might have also harbored resentment towards her son for his affair and for leaving his child behind. It turned out that my father had shared our address with his remarried wife. She visited our house and brought up the issue of inheritance, saying, "Well, John has passed away, as we've already informed you. But now, there's an issue with the inheritance. Would you mind relinquishing your inheritance rights? We don't have any children, so your rights pose a problem for us." I responded with indifference, "Well, that's fine. I never really considered him my father anyway. I have no interest in any inheritance now." To my surprise, my grandmother intervened, asserting her rights by stating, "Wait, I'm not giving up my rights." The woman was taken aback and asked, "What?" "I'm asserting my rightful claim. While it's true that I have mixed feelings about my son's death in a car accident, I can't say I'm not sad. But I'm much angrier that he abandoned young Jennifer to be with you. So, of course, I'll assert my rights." The woman seemed surprised by my grandmother's firm stance and left. My grandmother smiled at me and said, "That was the right thing to do." It turned out that my father and his second wife had no children and lived a luxurious lifestyle together. Apparently, my playboy father had been quite successful as an entrepreneur in the real estate business, amassing a fortune. Following the incident, my grandmother contacted a relative who happened to be a lawyer. She asked if he could mediate the inheritance issue to prevent any conflicts. Soon after, my relative, who was like an uncle to me, came to our house. He agreed with my grandmother, acknowledging that inheritance disputes can become messy. He said, "But in this case, I think you're right, Grandma." I hesitated at first, expressing my reluctance to claim my father's inheritance due to its tainted nature. However, my uncle encouraged me to think more maturely about the situation and consider my grandmother's feelings. He reminded me of how my grandmother had done her best to raise me, prioritizing my needs over her own retirement plans. Understanding his point of view, I began to reconsider. I realized that raising me must have cost my grandparents a significant amount of money, despite their intentions to save for their retirement. They had even sent me to tutoring classes during middle school and celebrated special occasions with me. Taking all of this into account, I decided to understand my grandmother's feelings and changed my mind. I chose to assert my inheritance rights after all. When we informed the second wife, she became furious. In the end, it all boiled down to money, even after someone's death. After carefully reconsidering, I made the decision to assert my rights. I regret sharing this with all of you, it's too late now. We have a lawyer in our family, and how dare you accuse me of pulling a sneaky trick? I won't tolerate accusations of sneakiness. It's my legitimate right. Yes, I was abandoned by my parents, but that doesn't give you the right to belittle me. Oh, it appears you're not aware that you were also deceived. Wait, what are you talking about? When my father passed away, a woman came forward claiming his inheritance. To our surprise, she was his mistress. Can you believe it? She's foolish for trying to claim the inheritance as his mistress. Ah. And she wasn't the only one, there were 3 of them. I was shocked, and my jaw dropped. Well, at least they didn't have children. I'm going to claim a significant portion of the inheritance. It's my rightful share. No, don't be selfish. It's mine too. LOL. The second wife was sobbing. Of course, she would be devastated. The men she thought loved her faithfully had other women. I realized how foolish my father was. It's a good thing he didn't have children with them. In the end, I inherited my father's estate. Initially, I didn't want anything from such a father, but I had to consider my grandmother's situation better. I gave the money to my grandmother, saying, "Please use it for the future. I'm sorry for what I said before, but I've come to a realization. It must have been difficult raising me, and I want you to use this money for your future, Jennifer. But I can't use all of it. It's okay, but what about when you get married someday? Save some of it for that." Grandma, don't worry about me. But what about you, Grandma? A year later, I met a wonderful man at a social gathering. We dated and got married. When he proposed, I was thrilled. He understood my family situation and suggested that we live together with my grandmother. I felt terrible, but he said, "Let's be good to your grandma." At the wedding, my grandmother cried tears of joy. I felt like I could finally repay her kindness. From that day on, I was determined to become even more dependable and put my grandmother at ease in the future.